Julian. Thank you for doing this interview with us. I'm delighted to have you here. As the CEO of techUK, Britain's leading tech membership organization with over 850 members spread across the country, I am very much looking forward to this discussion. I thought we'd start off with the current coronavirus pandemic. Technology has really leaped to the forefront in terms of helping the industry cope with this crisis. And I was wondering if I could have some of your thoughts on the UK-India tech partnership and how this has been affected by the pandemic.
Well, I think a number of things. Here in the UK, we've done quite a bit of activity, and we've also got quite a bit of evidence now that shows the importance of the tech industry, tech infrastructure, tech applications and solutions and services to keeping the country going in the face of what has been a very, very difficult time for us. So, you know, we at techUK had a sort of three-pronged strategy to approach this with our members. The first one was obviously responding to the crisis when it happened. And that was very much about health services, public services, informing citizens, informing businesses. So a lot of effort went into that. Over 150 of our member companies engaged directly with the NHS with new ideas, new services, and you've seen some of the excellence of tech in coming up with new ideas, but also just keeping people connected, families connected. And I know, you know, there's a very strong connections between India and the UK socially, as well as from a business and a tech point of view. So the number of conversations that have been happening over technologies like this one, like the Zoom call that we're on now, between the UK and India has been immense. And I see the same pattern in India. Through our colleagues at NASSCOM, we often get their updates on what's going on. And again, I see the pattern where industries have been able to cope. Second phase of this is obviously adapting to the new normal. And again, I see that very much in the Indian companies that we have working here and companies in NASSCOM, how they're changing what they do, moving to the online world, making sure that their products are digitally enabled, even physical products. And you think about things like restaurants and food stores, the ability to actually keep in contact with your customers, to shift maybe from a dine-in pattern to a home delivery pattern, or to manage bookings in a different way. All the QR code menus that we see everywhere, you know, these things are all the things that happen. And then the last thing, and we're probably slightly ahead of India in terms of our experience of the waves of this virus, and hopefully, you know, the Indian experience will not be as bad as perhaps some projections are. But if it is, then obviously the challenge they will have will be very similar as the one we have, which is how do you now recover, reinvent your economy? And that is going to be about digital. And that's where I think both the UK and India are extremely well placed, because they have strong digital capabilities, strong export capabilities from digital, strong leadership in some of the new technologies that are going to matter.
Talking further about this partnership, there's certainly a lot of potential, but let's talk a little bit about the challenges. What do you think are the challenges that are, you know, both these countries are facing, and how do you think they could address it? Is there scope for them addressing certain common challenges together?
Well, one we've certainly learned from our Indian friends and colleagues about is skills. And I really do think that this is an area where we at techUK have picked up some of the ideas that NASSCOM and the Indian government and other Indian business associations have been looking at here, and also colleges throughout India, which is mapping the industry, actually showing people what the pathways are through the industry and the signposts to get into the industry. And this is really important in the time of economic change and churn that we have now, which is, you know, if I'm in the airline industry, life is not going to be so good for some considerable time, but I've got skills that repurposed could take me into one of the growing areas of the tech industry. But I just need to know how do I get into that? How do I then acquire those skills? How do I prove, you know, I get the accreditation that proves that? And we've seen how what a thorough job the Indian government, the Indian industry, and NASSCOM have done, where they've actually said these are all of the characteristics of a tech career, from the sort of entry level skills right the way to the most advanced skills. And this is how you go through that. So we've put together a proposal in the UK for a similar sort of thing, and we've just acquired through a merger a company that does accreditation of degree level tech skills. And we are saying, right, what we're going to do with that is we're going to expand that in a similar way to what has been done in India. So that's the first one, I would say, is very clear. The second one is digital identity. And again, I do think that there's been a huge amount of progress in India. And think about the challenge, you know, I mean, we are what, 65, 66 million people here in the UK. There's a lot more in India. So the fact that you've managed to create a digital identity, and obviously there are always challenges with this, but by and large, a digital identity that really works is very robust. And then that leads to other things. It leads to the ability then for you to have jobs mapped against those digital identities, programs targeted against those digital. I know there are a lot of welfare programs, for example, in India that are targeted. Brings you into more of the cashless society, which is clearly a direction of travel. So we are saying the same thing to the UK government here, that we need to address this question of digital identity, and I'm leaning a lot on Then when I come to some of the other areas, I think the exchange can go the other way. If you look at things like health tech, if you look at things like AI in various areas, deep data science, I think there are a lot of capability here in the UK. And I know a lot of the major Indian companies that are trading here in the UK are very interested to partner with and to invest in those sort of companies in the UK. They're all looking, how do we make that work?
I thought we could talk a little bit about SMEs as well, because we're seeing SMEs fast and rising as, a sort of backbone to the economy, certainly in India as well, and I'm sure the UK as well. We're seeing a lot of traction in those areas. So I was just wondering if you could share your thoughts about, how UK and India can help support tech SMEs. Over the past few years, you've been doing sort of work. How's that work sort of developed now during the crisis, and how do you see their role evolving under the current climate? Could they be the future of tech collaboration? Could they act as that bridge that's very much needed right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the startups, the small companies of today, first of all, are two things. They're the potential big companies tomorrow. I mean, this is an industry where you can go from being in a garage, a shed, top floor of a block of flats somewhere, to actually being in Menlo Park or in Bangalore or here in the city in London or Cambridge, in a massive sort of science park. And those transitions happen very fast, and that's so. Job number one is, can we actually make it an encouraging place for both countries, for people to start companies, to land companies, and to grow those companies? And we've done a lot of work on that here at techUK, in association with the UK government, things like the Tech Nation initiative, and also clusters around the country. So that's the first thing. You've got to do that. And we've had some very interesting connections between Indian investors looking to invest in startups here in the UK, and similarly seeing the success of opening up some of the potential for people to invest in startups in India. And some of those startups have got very big, in terms of some areas. A telco has been expanding fantastically for ages in India, but also some of the new social media, e-commerce, taxi and transportation companies as well. You've got loads of national champions that have grown from that. So that's job number one, and I think we need to keep at that. You need to get the tax advantages right. You need to get the open in climate for investment, and you need to make sure that there is clear openness and a legal framework, and everybody understands that. The second job of work with SMEs is actually to digitize. Not just looking after ourselves and the SMEs in our industry, but digitizing the SMEs everywhere else. And again, that's a big project for us here in techUK. We've recently just about to complete a national inquiry where we've gone around virtually, of course, because nowadays, it's very easy to do, very quick. The commute to Wales has never been quicker. I was there in about 30 seconds yesterday morning when we did one of our events. And normally you get stuck on the M4. Your Indian viewers and listeners may not know that, but it's a motorway that does clog up. So you can do this kind of thing. And what we found in our 6, and will be 7 shortly, in all the nations and the regions of the UK, is the challenge that ordinary businesses, i.e. not tech businesses, face. Now they have to digitize. But the good news is they all recognize they need to do this now. Arguably SMEs have been potentially laggards in this, they haven't had the time or the focus or the skills. So they now know they need to do it. And so that feeds back into these other initiatives that I've talked about. So really, really important that we make the skills opportunity and the skills capability very broad-based. And then that we actually encourage investment in tech. So we're talking to the UK government about how they can encourage investment in the cloud, how they can encourage investment in productivity software, how they can encourage people to get onto the web, trade online, increase the digital component of what they offer. And that's the second task for SMEs. If you do that, guess what? They will buy from small tech companies, they'll buy from local tech companies, because that's how trade works. And you'll see fantastic pivot to digital across both our countries.
Touching more about skills and talking a little bit more about that, I know techUK has been working on several other projects with NASSCOM, which you mentioned in passing. You also mentioned the recent acquisition. So I was wondering if you could give us a few details on that, because the skills gap, particularly in tech, has been a major concern, and has been even before the pandemic hit. And I think with the pandemic and the rapid digitalization that's happened almost overnight, particularly in countries like India, we're now looking at a growing gap for these skills, especially with, like you said, transferable skills. So if there's a gap with existing tech skills, you have more people who are trying to transfer and kind of, upgrade their skills. It's just complicating the situation. So how can that be addressed? And maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the projects that you've been involved in with NASSCOM.
Yeah. So, as we were talking earlier, I got some inspiration from NASSCOM. I always think whenever you embark on something, the first step is inspiration, and that was really inspiring. They talked to me about the 2 million person target that they had undertaken with the Indian government. To produce 2 million more really highly skilled tech-enabled people who were able to do data sciences, work in the machine learning and the AI space, work in advanced telecommunications, 5G, work in things like drones and Edtech and all of those new technologies. So that's the first thing that we got. So what we then did was to say, okay, well, can we now get into some specific focus areas and programs, and from that we have developed our approach, which is taking a really strong look, for example, at 4 aspects of this. The first one is engagement. How do you make everybody aware there is careers in tech? So starting early, starting in schools, and making them aware of the broadness of the tech. You don't all have to be the most advanced coder to be in tech. Other people are needed. Designers are needed. Project managers are needed. Communicators, really important. How do you actually understand what's needed to deploy tech, and how do you convince people to go with it? And those soft skills and teamwork are as important to tech as anything else. So making people aware of that. Then the second thing is the point about making it accessible to everybody. And I do think here we're going to learn from each other on that, because I do think that, perhaps the danger in India, there are so many people wanting to get into tech. How do you ensure that you don't just take the low-hanging fruit? How do you make sure everybody has digital capability? We've done some work here on older people, and we did a survey with one of our members, and actually old people, they like to use tech. People over 70 are just as happy to use tech, and particularly obviously the pandemic. Look for a bright side. The fact that Granny can talk to the extended family who are not allowed perhaps to visit, or there are travel restrictions or whatever, is fantastic. So that's one of the ways. The next thing then is how do you deliver this in ways that people can consume? So one of the things that we've been very interested in is the growth of online edtech, which again is very prominent in India, but also very prominent here. And we're looking at, therefore, how do you do bite-sized bits of this? So, if you're working in another industry, or you are from a particular family background, maybe you can't take 3 years to go through the classic university or college thinking. Maybe maybe you want to learn online. Maybe you want to do something that's bite-sized. How do you put that together? How do you then build up a series of credits? And that's one of the discussions that we're having with NASSCOM. And then, of course, the last thing is the best and the brightest and the most skills. And this is where we're calling for the UK government to be bold and say, we are going to get the best skills from around the world. And of course, India has an absolute plethora of those sort of skills. So we need immigration policies. We need exchange of people. We need to be able to have flexible movement of people. Our industries in both countries need to attract the brightest and best. I think in some ways we've sort of watched perhaps the Americans tightening their visa restrictions. And I know this from my career. I was a long time in the IBM company. I saw many, many brilliant people coming from Indian backgrounds, either from India or settled families, and taking lead roles in the technical prowess development of that great company. And so when I saw the Americans say, well, maybe we're not going to give so many visas out, I thought, well, hello, here's a chance for us. So send us your brightest and best. And that seems to be the policy of the government in terms of what they're saying is going to be the new regime for immigration. So those are the things to do, it seems to me.
Lots of interesting points there, and I was trying to make mental notes while you were talking. So 2 things that came up that I really, really want to discuss further. One was you talked about how tech is kind of, in a certain way, sort of helping people overcome boundaries of age, background. Yeah. So basically looking at diversity. And so I guess the foremost question in my mind is, there's this whole campaign right now going about building back better, resetting, really having a good hard look at how business has been conducted as usual and do it in a better way. And clearly tech in many ways kind of levels a lot of the playing fields for people in terms of age, background, ethnicity. So I thought I'd ask the expert, that is you, about how it can play a more pivotal role in terms of just kind of helping this campaign in terms of inclusion, social inclusion, diversity, sustainability, which is again a very, very important thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we are actually at the moment determining what we're calling techUK 2. So what are we all about in the next decade? And that's very much informed by our digital dialogues around the UK, talking to companies, talking to organisations, local and regional government, social groups, people themselves, and small business particularly, and saying, okay, what are the important things that matter? And defining that for the future. So sticking to our mission, which is to make the UK a great place for tech companies to start, to land, to grow. Make the UK economy take the greatest advantage it can of digital technologies, make everything digital. And then thirdly, making digital tech good for the people and society of the UK, but also the planet. And you really touched on something there. So we're actually now saying we're making 4 promises that we're going to focus on in the next few years. I mean, setting something up for a decade is a little challenging these days, but this is where we want to go. We want to focus on people. We want to say, okay, how can everybody participate in tech? How can we open up? How can we be inclusive? And we don't have a great record. We have to hold our hand up here. The tech industry does look a little bit, from one particular class, one particular type of person in England and the rest of the UK, often from one particular ethnic group and one particular gender. Now, we're getting a bit better on gender, but we've got a long way to go on all of the other things. So we need to do that. We also need to make tech. We promise that we're going to make tech good for society. So we are looking at, how can tech be responsible? How can we contribute to these things? So today, for example, we've just partnered with Crisis, which is a charity here focused on homelessness. And actually, how can we set up new tech ventures that can bring solutions to help homeless people, both with the life that they have to cope with and the situation, but also to get them into new jobs and new careers and so on. And making tech good for society in so many ways. And that's, about education. It's about transforming cities. It's about making things accessible to people. And then the third promise is that we make tech good for the economy. And that you need to make sure everybody has a chance at this, and nobody's excluded. So, every job now. One of the things that you mentioned in terms of barriers, the tech that has removed is distance. I mean, now people are advertising for remote working directors, aren't they? So, how do you do this new world? You can employ somebody hundreds, thousands of miles away, and they can still be a part of your organization, but you have to get it right. And then the last commitment is to the planet. And we have a lot to offer in terms of the way that we can reduce carbon usage, we can make things greener, we can build on sustainability, but we've also got to make sure we do it ourselves. So we understand that how we use energy in data centers, we understand what goes into the devices that people use, and we understand how we recycle them. Again, that's a big focus for us at techUK. But using AI, using space technology, using other technologies, you can actually manage and monitor what's going on in the planet so much better, and you can help the move to alternative fuels, renewable energy. All of those things tech can enable in so many ways and make us all much smarter.
You touched upon a really interesting point there, Julian, which I was actually going to ask you anyway about is the future of work. How tech is kind of bridged this distance, and people are now almost everyone's working from home now, and more and more this idea of a physical office is becoming more and more distant. We don't know if we'll ever go back to it, and I was really interested in kind of getting your thoughts on this about, I mean, yes, we're talking about how tech is wonderful and it is, it's allowed people to work from every corner of the world. But what are the challenges that this is going to bring up? Because there's all these people now, like a lot of our confirmed norms are being upended, particularly in terms of work and traditional workplaces. So how do you see that happening? What are the challenges we need to look out for before we get, very excited about this whole new normal?
Yeah, well, I think there are two or three things I would comment on there, Ishita. The first one would be that it is fantastic that we can do these things and that we can use the technology, just like you and I are at this moment. And the benefits are clear, and we need to make sure we have the infrastructure to support that. We need to make sure that we continue to deliver really easy to use tools, and we benefit from that. And we open our horizons, recruit people from all over the place, make the enterprises' walls and barriers disappear, become global, and that I think is something tech can help with. However, I would say that the idea that humans are going to change entirely in terms of what they want and how they enjoy being, and then stop being social, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think, even as because we moved all of our 65 employees online in a day here in the UK, which is a small beer compared to some of our member companies and companies in India who move thousands online in a similar amount of time. Obviously, we were helped by the fact we had already committed to the cloud. We already had some of the technology in place to do this. But we did find there are things you need to think about. So sitting at a screen all day, the tyranny of the laptop or the phone looking at you all day long, wanting something, and health, mental health, physical well-being, mental well-being. These are important things to factor in. And you also have to consider not everybody has the space, not everybody has a quiet place, and therefore you just need to bear that in mind. So I actually think combine that with the human nature of wanting to socialize, that the idea that the workplace and the office is dead, I think is exaggerated. What I think there will be is much more flexibility, and it does. Bosses now have understood that day at home is not a duvet day. It can be a doing day, and I think that we have found that we are as productive online, but we still want to get back together. And that brings me to the third thing I would say, which is everybody's talking a lot about cities, and that okay, that's it, we'll all move to the suburb. And I think people need to think this through a little bit, because cities are very efficient and they do things. Virus is a problem at the moment, but they do things that you don't get if you're just spread over, a big suburban space or a remote, whatever, which is spontaneity, happenstance. It's still not that easy to do that with tech. We have certainly found that it takes a bit longer to do some things this way. So you have to sort of schedule something or interrupt somebody, whereas just walking past them at the coffee place or the water cooler or whatever it is, or just past it. Sally, I meant to ask you about this, or Kumar, what did happen about, those things can be so much quicker. But also you get people get ideas, and there's quite a bit of study about this that shows that there's more inventiveness, there's more productivity from that. So what I think you'll see is the tyranny of the commute, the tyranny of you've got to be a face in the office. I think that will be completely broken. I think the physical boundaries of enterprises will be changed, but I'm not sure that we're going to just completely disappear into the ether and just talk to each other virtually all the time. I'd love to come and say hello to you, for example, which would have been nice.
Thanks, Julian. This is my last question to you today. You talked a lot about cloud computing, and I think a recurring sort of argument or concern that I've been reading about, I think we all have been reading about, is data security. As more and more of us look towards the cloud and digitalize our processes, there's also the sort of background risk that about data security, cyber security. And I know the UK and India have been doing a lot in this field. So I was just wondering if you could share your thoughts about that. Like, how can they sort of progress together in this space, or can they progress together in this space?
I think they can and they should. Perhaps a sort of slight note of criticism. I do think that some of the Indian government statements about data localization need to be thought about. I understand the point, and I understand that there are some places in the world where you may feel that's not a good place to have data. But I do think that that's something that they need to think about, because it will be an impediment. And one of the features of the UK-Japan trade agreement that's just been signed is they've agreed not to engage in data localization restrictions. So, and that's really important, because the ability to actually do the processing where it makes the most sense and to have a 24/7 and all the rest of those things, those are important things. However, it is right that people concern themselves with two things. You mentioned cybersecurity. So absolutely, you have a responsibility to make data wherever it is, whether it be in India or whether it be in the UK or somewhere else. You need to make sure that it's secure. And that's a real job of work these days, because cybercrime is the easiest crime. That people don't have shotguns and sledgehammers and some of the break into banks anymore. They have a computer, a laptop, or a phone, and so you need to have very, very high standards of that, and you've got to keep at it, which means you've got to be at the bleeding edge of these technologies. So you've got to be nowadays, if you're not thinking about quantum computing and you're in financial services, where you should, because that could change the whole basis of encryption forever. And those kind of things need to be thought through. But I think at the end of the day, the most important of all of this is trust. If we want, which we do as an industry, and we believe it's the right thing for our customers, for our citizens, and for our economies and the planet, to use data and to integrate data and to converge technologies, then you've got to ensure people trust what you're doing, governments trust what you're doing, and other interested parties trust you. And trust is about the physical stuff. It's about laws. It's about technology. But it's mostly about attitude, and it's mostly about, do you care? Do you have the right ethical and moral approach to business? If you do, then you'll do the other things. If you don't, then why should people bring their business to you? Why should countries say, we will trade with you and we will allow data to flow between us? And so I think it's that trust, and we need to get that right. And we've had a big focus on ethics in our industry for a long time, and I know that's a big concern in India. And I know that all the Indian companies that we deal with here have that at the forefront of what they say. Can our customers trust us to do the right thing and do the things that matter for them and do it in the right way?
Thank you so much, Julian, for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule. Really, really appreciate you doing this interview with us and sharing your thoughts. And it was a really fantastic discussion. So thanks.
Thank you.